June 13th, 1942, became known to the British as Black Saturday because it was the day the armored battle at Gazala turned from dangerous to disastrous. The Eighth Army had already suffered through the failed counterattack against the Cauldron, the loss of Bir Hakeim, and the growing crisis around Knightsbridge. Yet there was still a difference between a battle going badly and a battle beginning to break the Army's power to recover. Black Saturday marked that difference. It was the day British armored strength was hammered so severely that the Gazala line could no longer be treated as a troubled defensive system waiting to be repaired. It was becoming a position that could not be saved by the mobile force meant to protect it.
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The immediate setting was the cramped and dangerous battlefield east of the Cauldron and around the Knightsbridge area. The desert still looked open, but operationally it had become tight, crowded, and unforgiving. British armored units were being forced to operate in a narrowing space shaped by Axis movement, minefields, defended boxes, supply routes, and the need to shield Tobruk. Rommel's forces had survived their earlier exposure and were now using the initiative to press against the British armor that remained. This was not a clean armored meeting engagement where both sides lined up and fought on equal terms. It was a battle in which one side increasingly shaped the killing ground, while the other struggled to understand where the next blow would fall.
British tanks went into this phase with courage, but courage could not replace lost cohesion. The armoured brigades had already been worn down by days of fighting around the Cauldron and Knightsbridge. Vehicles had been knocked out, damaged, abandoned, or withdrawn for repair. Crews were tired, recovery services were strained, and commanders were trying to direct formations whose real strength could be much lower than their organisational titles suggested. A brigade on a map still looked like a brigade, but on the ground it might contain fewer runners, fewer rested crews, less fuel, and less confidence than the symbol implied. That gap between paper strength and battlefield reality became deadly on Black Saturday. Rommel's forces understood how to exploit that weakness. The Axis method was not simply to throw panzers forward in a dramatic charge. German and Italian units used tanks, anti-tank guns, artillery, reconnaissance, and movement together to force British armor into bad positions. Panzers could appear to invite battle, shift direction, or draw attention, while anti-tank guns waited in positions where British tanks would be exposed. The open desert allowed movement, but it also allowed long fields of fire. A tank crew might believe it was engaging enemy armor, then discover too late that the more dangerous threat was a gun line it had not seen clearly through dust, smoke, and confusion. The British command problem had become severe by this point. The Eighth Army needed its armor concentrated and directed with precision, but the battle kept producing separated decisions and partial pictures. Reports arrived late, contradicted each other, or failed to capture the speed at which the situation was changing. A commander might send a formation to block one threat, only to find that another had developed elsewhere. A unit might be ordered to counterattack without the infantry, artillery, or reconnaissance support needed to make the attack more than another expensive advance into prepared fire. Black Saturday punished that lack of unity with a harshness that could not be ignored.
The fighting was relentless because the British armor could not afford to lose, but increasingly could not find a way to win. Tanks moved, engaged, pulled back, reformed, and went forward again into a battlefield where Axis guns and armor worked in concert. Dust made observation difficult and helped conceal both movement and danger. Shellfire and burning vehicles added confusion to a landscape already stripped of easy landmarks. Communications were imperfect, and the emotional pressure on crews and commanders grew with every loss. Armored warfare in this moment was not the sweeping, clean movement often imagined from maps. It was heat, noise, smoke, fear, mechanical strain, and decisions made under seconds of visibility.
The Grant tanks still mattered, and they could still hurt Axis armor when used effectively. Their guns gave British crews a power they had lacked earlier in the Desert War. But no tank, however useful, could survive indefinitely against a well-handled anti-tank system. Grants and cruisers needed artillery suppression, reconnaissance, infantry cooperation, and room to maneuver. Without those conditions, they could be caught in the same pattern that had already consumed British strength around the cauldron. The tragedy of Black Saturday was not that British tanks were useless. It was that useful machines were being fed into a battle where the enemy had increasingly shaped the terms of engagement.
Axis anti-tank guns became the silent architecture of the day's disaster. They turned patches of desert into lethal zones that were not always obvious until British armor entered them. The larger guns could kill at long range, while smaller weapons still mattered when positioned well and fired with discipline. Gun crews did not have to destroy every tank to break an attack. They only had to knock out enough vehicles, stop enough movement, and create enough confusion for the formation to lose momentum. Once momentum failed, British tanks became easier targets, recovery became harder, and commanders faced the grim choice of pressing on into fire or pulling back with fewer vehicles than they had started with.
The human cost was carried by the crews inside those machines and by the supporting troops around them. A tank knocked out in the desert was not just a lost entry on a strength return. It was men killed, wounded, burned, captured, or left trying to escape across dangerous ground. It was a crew's training and experience gone in seconds. It was mechanics and recovery teams facing the question of whether a damaged tank could be saved under fire. It was infantry and gun crews watching the armored shield they depended on grow thinner. Black Saturday was a mechanical disaster, but it was also a human one, and its severity should not be softened by treating tanks as mere equipment.
By the end of the day, British armored losses had become catastrophic enough to change the campaign's logic. Accounts vary in precise numbers, and the chaos of the battlefield makes false precision unhelpful, but the effect was unmistakable. The Eighth Army's ability to use armor as the mobile reserve behind the Gazala boxes had been gravely reduced. That mattered more than any single destroyed tank. The whole British defensive concept depended on armor being able to strike, block, and restore balance when Rommel shifted the fight. After Black Saturday, that concept was no longer credible in the same way. The boxes could still hold ground, but the force meant to save them was bleeding out.
The psychological effect was just as important as the material one. Armies can survive heavy losses if they believe they still control the next move. But Black Saturday told the British that Rommel was now shaping the battle with increasing freedom. The Eighth Army had tried to trap him, then tried to smash him, then tried to stabilize the line, and each effort had left it weaker. For Rommel's army, the day confirmed that the initiative had truly returned. Axis forces had not escaped the burdens of supply, losses, or exhaustion, but they had broken much of the British armored power that could have restored the situation. Confidence shifted because the battlefield had shifted.
The consequences reached beyond Knightsbridge and the immediate tank fight. Once British armor was so badly reduced, the Gazala line's fortified boxes became more vulnerable to isolation and abandonment. Tobruk, still looming behind the field army, became more exposed because the shield to its west was cracking. This is the link that makes Black Saturday essential to the larger story. The fall of Tobruk did not begin only at Tobruk's perimeter. It began in the mobile battle outside it, where the British lost the ability to keep Rommel away from the fortress approaches. A port can be strong and a garrison can be determined, but if the field army around it loses control, the fortress begins to become a trap. Black Saturday matters in the history of armored warfare because it shows how quickly armored power can be consumed when machines are committed without the full system needed to make them decisive.
The British did not lose because their soldiers lacked courage or because tanks had suddenly become obsolete. Gazala's earlier phases had already weakened the Eighth Army, but June 13th revealed the damage in a single harsh day. After Black Saturday, the question was no longer how the British would restore the Gazala line. It was how much of the army could be saved before the collapse reached Tobruk.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.